record button right now. And yeah, Gulnissa, the floor is yours. You can start whenever you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you very much to the ELINET team, and especially Paula, Jolanta, and Nadia to organize this seminar. And as you see on the screen here, I'm going today talk about multilingualism and EFL teachers' attitudes towards English and Kazakhstan. And before we actually start talking about the research itself, let me quickly give some background about myself as a research. So pretty much my research is around multilingualism and social linguistic aspects of learning and teaching English in Kazakhstan, as well as in other contexts. And I'm also interested in exploring what teachers and learners think about English and how this is all enacted in practice, both learning and teaching practices. So here I share some of my details. So you can check some information about my research on my page on ResearchGate. So that's about my professional background. And when it comes to the research that I'm going to share today, this is based on the published paper in Journal System in 2021, and I have the reference and the reference list. And I'm going to talk briefly about the background behind this study, what motivated this study, and of course I will talk about the key concepts in this study. These are teachers' attitudes, multilingualism, and I will be talking about social linguistic context of the study, which is Kazakhstan, and Paolo already gave you some details about what it looks like in Kazakhstan. And of course, I will talk about methodological aspects of the study itself, how the data was collected, what was the sample, how I analyze the data, and what it all means given learning and teaching practices. So let's start. Many of you know that English is getting so popular that at least a quarter of the world's population speaks some English, of course. And this has implications for English language teaching, in other words, ELT practices, because those practices, they should reflect the use of English for global communication, where multilingualism is a norm. But we know from research and from the literature available that still monolingual bias and native speaker norms are still dominant in ELT practices around the world. And given these background details, it's important that global Englishes, the global Englishes as a paradigm helps prepare learners to use English as a tool for global communication and to raise awareness of the issues related to that global use of English. And because I'm going to talk about teachers' attitudes, of course, in the field of teacher education, it's also important that we should recognize language teachers' multilingualism as something productive, not as something inhibiting, not as something limiting, which is a dominant view in traditional literature. But this must be seen as a productive way. Teachers' multilingualism as a productive way of engaging with students' multiple linguistic resources in order to enhance pedagogies. And literature shows that global English, of course, is not a one-size-fits-all paradigm. And we need evidence, we need empirical evidence from various geographical contexts to see how the innovations informed by global Englishes can exist, alongside the beliefs about language in those contexts. And examining those contextual factors actually impact teachers' attitudes And of course, it has implications for teaching and how global English's language teaching is feasible within that context. But there are not many studies which investigate multilingual English teachers' language attitudes within social-linguistic contexts, and therefore the scope in this research is to look at the language attitudes within the social context of the study here, which is Kazakhstan, as I said before. And the theoretical framework which guides this research has a few key concepts, and one of them is language attitudes. And you see here the definition and how it's conceptualized in this study. So language attitudes, these are attitudes towards language and language learning. And of course, I mean, language attitudes are composed of different dimensions, let's say. So these are cognitive, affective, and behavioral elements. And the second key aspect or key concept in this study is multilingualism, of course, and it's conceptualized following Lee. And I see here multilingualism as all the languages a person knows, and as well as knowledge of the norms for using the languages in context. This is, as you notice, this is a redefined perspective on language. And this conceptualization is not limited by linguistic boundaries, because, you know, the traditional view is that, you know, multilingualism is parallel monolingualism, meaning that, you know, it's 2 or 3 monolinguals in one, and they have fixed boundaries which cannot be, you know, which cannot be broken. I mean, so each linguistic system has its own boundary, and there is no opportunity for, you know, for fluid nature. So that's why I'm using here the definition by Lee, which actually shows that multilingualism is something which has a fluid nature within that person or speaker. There is a growing body of research on teachers' beliefs about English, and here I have listed some of them. But these studies, they have not fully investigated some potential factors which might influence language attitudes. And research shows that it's actually important and insightful to see what could be underlying certain attitudes, because if we know that, if we know what could be underpinning some attitudes, we as researchers, as practitioners, we have some way of influencing those attitudes. So therefore, it's quite important to examine some likely factors which might impact teachers' language attitudes. And also the existing body of research, in most cases, they are small scale in design, and they also employ a single measure. In many cases, these are quantitative surveys. But as Galloway and Rose mentioned, attitudes are social constructs, and therefore we need some in-depth qualitative research which can allow us to fully explore complexities of attitudes as social constructs. Another key concept in the framework of this study is language ideologies. And here I share with you the definition of language ideologies. These are sets of beliefs, values, and cultural frames that circulate in society and influence the ways in which language is conceptualized, as well as how it is used. And language ideology is quite helpful to study the link between social structures, power relations, and language use. And thus these language ideologies, they are seen beyond the linguistic system. So it's not only about the language, it's much more than that. And they are beliefs, webs of beliefs, as Blackledge indicates, which are enacted in daily communication. And they reflect dynamic relationships between speakers and language. And of course, language ideologies, they are ideologically charged, and they are quite important. And when we understand, when we have a better understanding of language ideologies, we can actually see what's happening in the classrooms and what the learning needs could be. I mean, the classrooms around the world, and even within one specific geographical context, they're quite diverse in their learning needs, in their linguistic backgrounds, and therefore language ideologies as a theoretical frame can be helpful to tap into learners and teachers' beliefs about language and how it's used. Okay, coming to the social linguistic context of this study, which is Kazakhstan. So, as was already mentioned in the beginning, it's an officially bilingual country with 2 languages as official languages, which are Kazakh and Russian, besides many more minority languages. And according to official statistics, Kazakhstan is a home of more than 100 ethnic minorities. And of course, those ethnic minorities, they have their own minority languages. So in that sense, it's a quite interesting social linguistic landscape to study. And recent research in Kazakhstan shows that language is an important means of constructing legitimate identities in the country. Also, there is social intolerance to mixing multiple languages in communication practices. And research by Wheeler shows that there is a social preference for parallel monolingualism over translanguaging, meaning that speakers are not expected to mix languages, and they are expected to stick to pure language. So that's the idea of linguistic purism. And so based on that attitude towards language use in Kazakhstan, we can see that those ideas shape behavioral outcomes, meaning that, so especially here, the research showed that in official settings, the speakers, they don't mix languages. They have to stick to either Kazakh or Russian, depending on the context, and mixing languages, translanguaging is not a common practice. And following that idea, there is a strong tendency to separate uses of major languages, Kazakh and Russian, and this is reinforced by the revival of the Kazakh language. So let me give you, a short tradition, a short historical background. Kazakhstan was a Soviet country, and for about 70 years or so, Russian was the official language, and the languages of ethnic minorities, they were suppressed. And with the breakup of the Soviet Union, Kazakh language as L1 of the majority of the population, it started to be officially revived, and it has, of course, certain implications. So, socioeconomic and political implications, and of course, knowledge of Kazakh influences better employment in this country. It should be also mentioned that there are complexities related to actual language use. So how do speakers navigate through, through those complexities, meaning that there are two major languages, Kazakh as L1 of the majority, as well as Russian, and most representatives of Kazakhstan, they self-report themselves as officially bilingual speakers. But when it comes to actual use, there are certain complexities, and they are all linked to ideological conceptions of the language itself. And I have already mentioned some of them, such as linguistic purism, separate use of languages, not mixing them. But we need more evidence, more empirical evidence as to how the speakers, so in this case, at least, the speakers of two languages, how they navigate those complexities. And so let me share now some methodological aspects of the study. So as I already said, this is based on the published paper, and I have the reference available in the slides. So the sample here consisted of 25 university instructors of English. They all spent at least 1 year either in the United Kingdom or United States universities. So these have been degree and non-degree programs, and they were all there on scholarship schemes. And I also have here some demographic information about the participants. And also I should mention that this particular data set is a part of a larger study, and that larger study was a qualitative study on expectations, both instructors and students' expectations of good English teachers in Kazakhstan. And surprisingly, when I was conducting interviews and collecting data within that larger research, it was my doctoral study actually, surprisingly, most of the teachers and students, they were talking a lot about what language is, what is English and so on. And then I decided that I will focus on that particular data set regarding beliefs about English, attitudes towards English. And then that was the sort of starting point. Okay, so I have conducted semi-structured interviews in English because all my teachers, they speak fluent English. And after the first interviews, I asked some of them, to follow up on certain issues that were not clear for me. And then, so basically I did 2 interviews. So the second, the follow-up interviews were to validate my interpretations and see whether the teacher participants agree, or if they have something to add towards the data and interpretations that I was offering. And as a result, I have come up with 2 common themes. So the first theme is about teachers' attitudes towards English vis-a-vis Kazakh and Russian, so vis-a-vis 2 major languages in the country. And the second major thing was English teachers' views about normativity of English. So my next slides would be talking about those findings and data in more detail. So starting with the first theme, which is teachers' attitudes towards English vis-a-vis Kazakh and Russian. It appears that teacher participants in this study, they perceive nature of English in relation to Russian and Kazakh. So what it means is that here I provide some representative extracts from the interviews. So for example, as one of the participants was saying, she would like to use Kazakh when teaching English, but she doesn't want to be called a Shala Kazakh teacher. So Shala Kazakh, this is a term, a derogatory term in Kazakhstan. This is in Kazakh language, the term Shala Kazakh. This means when a person cannot speak pure Kazakh. So the literary translation of this phrase Shala Kazakh is that half Kazakh, so 50% Kazakh, because that person cannot speak pure Kazakh. So in this country, there is even this idea of pure Kazakh. So therefore, most of the participants, they were concerned about that labeling. So there is this is quite strong in the context. So they were concerned, and they were not willing to be labeled like that. So and therefore, they were using English in the English classroom. And also, I have also another representative extract from the interview talking about, the idea of translanguaging, that people don't know about translanguaging according to the participants. And that was actually, key idea around all the interviews. I mean, the nature of English in relation to Russian and Kazakhstan, and in relation to those local ideas of, speaking pure language. And here's another extract from the interview. This is quite long, and this is about also the attitudes, regarding the accent. So we all know that accent is actually a quite strong idea when it comes to English classrooms. We will have those native speaker pronunciation expectations, and but because the common theme here was how English is perceived within Russian and Kazakh language ideologies. Again, the teacher participants were saying that they would mainly use English because they are English teachers, and they will be using Kazakh only when it's absolutely necessary, that's as a last resort. And the teacher participants, they are actually aware of students' expectations that people should speak good Kazakh. So good Kazakh again means speaking pure Kazakh, not mixing it with other languages. Another major theme in this research, as I already said before, are English teachers' views about normativity of English, about the norm. So the idea of norm is actually quite strong in ELT practices around the world, as the research and literature shows. But in this research, the participants, they raise their awareness of English used in reality because of their overseas experiences. So coming to English-speaking countries open up all the pragmatic ways of English. And of course, in those contexts, it was not a norm-based English, so to say. So it was not a native speaker-based English, and it was a discovery for all the teacher participants when they arrived into those English-speaking countries. And actually, before starting their overseas study programs, all the participants claimed that they were thinking about English as a fixed system, meaning that it's a fixed system with rigid boundaries, linguistically speaking. And actually, exposure to English beyond an EFL classroom. So in this case, as you remember, all the participants, they spent at least 1 year either in the United States or in the United Kingdom. That very exposure actually was critical for all the participants in this study to re-examine their perceptions of English. So here I share some of the interview data to support this theme. And so here, as this was the most common idea that people don't know about English as a lingua franca, and people think that English is the language of the USA, UK, and Australia. So that was a representative interview extract across all the interviews. And of course, even though the participants, they tried to raise the learners' awareness of global Englishes, they still were concerned about their students' needs. So as you see here, some interview extracts, the teachers do understand that students feel awkward because of their accent, and we know that normally students they expect to be speaking like a native speaker. So this is a norm-based teaching model and learning model. And again, this is all linked to the expectations regarding accent. So this should be either British or American accent. And interestingly, the teacher participants, they were also aware of the parents' expectations regarding language use. And just let me just give here some of the ideas that I didn't include in the slide. Is that so when I was talking to the teacher participants, they were saying that I'm willing to teach English according to global English's paradigm, but then I am also aware of the examinations which are based on native speaker English paradigm, and I am also aware of the parents' expectations that they do expect, native speaker like teaching, and therefore all these challenges, they did have influence over teaching practices, and because of those perceptions of English, and because of the awareness of regarding the language use, teachers had to stick to norm-based language teaching, even though they were aware of of translanguaging as a concept and how it might be practiced in the classroom. But nevertheless, the teachers were limited. They were constrained in their teaching because of those perceptions of English, which are linked to language ideologies in Kazakhstan. So as I said before, language ideologies in the country, they are more inclined towards the traditional view of multilingualism, which means that a multilingual person knows more than two languages, but when they speak, when they utter something, they should not translanguage, they should not mix. And the idea of linguistic purism is quite strong as a public expectation. Therefore, the teachers, they were constrained by those contextual factors. And what all of this means. So I offer some of the conclusions here. So as I already said, the teachers positions themselves as multilingualism, but this is challenged by traditional conceptions of multilingualism as separate monolinguals in one. And accent was quite strong in the data. All the teachers, they were aware that when they want to use Kazakh or Russian to help the learners, based on the idea of translanguaging, working towards inclusive teaching practices, they were pretty much willing to do it. But as I said before, they were constrained by their own, not native-like accents of Kazakh. And these biases, they did influence their pedagogical choices in teaching English. And quite interestingly, why the participants here, the teachers, of course, why they use English is influenced by their Kazakh language. This was a quite surprising finding, and to my knowledge, such a finding has not been reported in the literature. At least there are no published accounts of similar findings. So interestingly, teachers use English only in the classroom because they don't want to be labeled as, you know, half speaking Kazakh, or this idea of Shala Kazakh as it's used in society. And this, of course, needs further research into how L1 use, you know, can be linked to teaching practices. So it would be interesting to see how other geographical contexts with similar social linguistic complexities, what they find out about these ideas of L1 vis-a-vis other languages. So as I already said, teachers are more likely to teach norm-based English because of students' expectations as well as official orientations, officially declared in EFL policies. So at least in this country, it's officially declared that learners of English should speak like a native speaker of English. And also, this research shows that English teaching and learning processes are multidimensional with a complex combination of external factors. So I have given some examples of those factors on different layers: socio-cultural, socio-linguistic, and political layers. And so this macro level influence, of course, has its impact on how English is taught in classrooms at the micro level. But having said that, I should also mention that the study has certain limitations. And of course, you know, the most obvious limitation would be that these are all self-reported data. And we should actually see what happens in the classroom. What are the actual classroom practices? So, and it would be interesting to supplement the interview data with the classroom observation data and see how attitudes towards English and towards other languages, how they are enacted in classroom, and what teachers believe about those practices. And another limitation of the study is that the sample here is not a typical sample, I would say. So as I said, I have 25 teaching participants here, and they spent at least 1 year in the United States or United Kingdom. And of course, this does not represent a typical English teacher in Kazakhstan. But still, given the exploratory nature of this research, the insights that were derived based on empirical evidence are quite helpful to see how global English as language teaching can be incorporated in this particular study, for example, and how global English is teaching policies, and I mean, how we implement them. They of course should take account of teachers' beliefs and students' beliefs as well. So it would be interesting to compare what students believe about English, and as well as teachers and other stakeholders. And this research data also gave rise to some questions that would be very much interesting to explore in further research. So as I have already touched upon the idea of identity, so it would be very much important to see how, as language practitioners, or how as scholars, we can promote more inclusive teaching environments and multilingual contexts, and what identities are legitimate. So in this research, a legitimate Kazakh identity was pretty much dependent on the skills of Kazakh. So that was the one insight based on this research. But it would be very much interesting to see the concept of legitimate identities, how they are enacted in the language classrooms, and how we can promote inclusivity based on that. And also an interesting question to explore would be, how can we cultivate a metacognitive awareness of social linguistic resources so that the pluricentric view of English, which is not constrained by a traditional view of multilingualism as separate monolinguals in one. So how we can engage with that view so that communication happens. And it's because, this is a global world, and in this world, multilingualism is the norm, and how, as researchers, as practitioners, we can cultivate that metacognitive awareness. So these would be important questions to explore in relation to global English's languages innovations. So if we want to implement those innovations, these questions would be guiding the research, and how global Englishes can help exploring these questions as a paradigm. So I think I am finishing. So this is the list of the references. This is the paper that I was talking about. So this is the published paper that I mentioned. And thank you for your information. I would be very much now willing to hear your questions, please. And if you want to do some follow-up, I am very much looking forward to continue our conversation through the emails that I share here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gulnissa. Very, very interesting topic, quite relevant to what I'm doing as well. Before I continue, is there anybody who has any question for our speaker? Okay, somebody has raised their hand. You can either raise your hand or write in the chat. But yeah, do ask, please.
Hello, thank you very much, Gulnissa. It's very, very interesting. And it raises several questions, but I maybe I'll ask only one. Regarding, it's not interesting that students, they have very high expectation that teachers should speak like native speaker. But what about the recruitment? When they recruit these teachers, do the administration have the same perspective? Because they speak like native speaker, or maybe, or based on what they are recruiting these teachers?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I don't have the official documentation on recruitment regarding the native speakerism, so to say, but I'm aware of the local practices, and it's implicitly expected that a teacher should speak like a native speaker. So as I mentioned before, accent is quite strong and influential in recruitment practices as well.
Interesting. And but I mean, is there any awareness, like teacher, like they try to encourage for non-native like English? Is there any attempts or because maybe the administration and students, they always have high expectation, so that's why they feel very difficult to raise such awareness?
So in this research, my teacher participants, they made attempts. So they actually tried to raise the awareness of the learners, showing, so some of the teachers were actually showing YouTube videos with quite diverse speakers from around the world who do speak English, but they don't sound like somebody from the United Kingdom or United States. Yes, they did such attempts, but they were constrained by the curriculum because they don't have much time to focus on that. And some of the teachers were saying that when the senior colleagues found out about those practices to raise awareness, showing YouTube videos, some of the teacher participants were criticized. Yeah, you know, the administration was saying, why are you wasting your time on that? We should focus on the examination. We need to have some good grades. So this is all linked to ranking of the program. And the learners should get some good grades for the examinations. Therefore, teachers don't have much time to raise awareness, but they try. They try.
Yeah, but it will be very interesting to see students' reaction to this, and if they evaluate their comprehension and evaluate to what extent they understand non-native. So it will be very interesting study. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much for the question. Anybody else in the chat would like to ask questions? Because otherwise I have some. Yeah, we do have a question. Please do speak up.
Hi, Gulnissa, thank you very much for your talk. That was really interesting. I'm not quite sure what my question is exactly, but I'm very interested in this idea of like linguistic purity and the separation of the different languages that are spoken in Kazakhstan. And I've had some experience working with teachers in Algeria, for example, which is also a multilingual country, and there's a history of kind of colonialism and dominance from a European kind of influence as well. But translanguaging seems to happen a lot there. You know, Arabic and French are mixed a lot, and then while people are speaking or learning English, the Arabic and English and French are often mixed quite a lot. So there seems to be a lot of translanguaging going on there. And I'm wondering what the reasons might be for, it seems to be that there's at least a kind of reluctance or a reluctance to mix the languages, or a desire to keep the languages separate. Why do you think that feeling is so strong or that phenomenon is so strong in Kazakhstan?
So thank you. So just let me check if I understand correctly. Why? So you are asking about the reasons why there is reluctance towards translanguaging practices.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's why is there a reluctance to translanguage, or whether there's a desire to maintain separation between the languages.
Okay. Thank you for the question. So language ideologies are quite strong, as research shows in Kazakhstan, I mean, towards the linguistic purism. And even the official documentation says that a person should be speaking, you know, pure Kazakh, pure Russian. So meaning that officially, multilingualism in the documents, at least, it's perceived as traditional multilingualism. But it's changing. I mean, I am a teacher myself in Kazakhstan, and of course, I do hear a lot of translanguaging during some informal conversations. But the data here was specifically about classroom practices, and teachers, even though they were aware of translanguaging, they were constrained by this English-only idea. So ELT practices are sort of controlled by that movement, English-only movement. And when there are classroom observations, teachers can be criticized for mixing languages. So the idea is that language teachers of English, they should be speaking English only. And of course, we need more data. And as I said, we need to do classroom observations to see why. So unfortunately, I don't have much to say now.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? Because actually I have a question which is connected to what Steve just asked, because quite rightly during your presentation you were mentioning about this idea of the normativity of English, English being seen as the language of the UK, USA, Australia, okay, the inner circle countries of culture, right? And at the same time I was wondering, so is this idea of normativity of English connected to another thing that you mentioned in the presentation, this idea, this patriotic idea between language and nation of the Shala Kazakh, the person who cannot fully speak Kazakh is half Kazakh. Is there a connection between this and what Steve was asking, perhaps?
Yes, thank you, Paolo. This is such a good question. I mean, it requires a lot of input. So yes, so the idea of normativity is common for Kazakh language as well. So especially now that the country is in the transition period, and the nationals of this country, they are trying to make sense of themselves. And it seems that Kazakh language is a key means of constructing this identity of a Kazakhstani citizen who should speak pure Kazakh. And, you know, in social media, it's so common, you know, people have battles and fight over mixing, and they say, no, you are a citizen of Kazakhstan, you have to speak pure normative Kazakh. So if you are mixing Kazakh with Russian, you are not you know, legitimate sort of citizen of this country. Yeah, so normativity is quite powerful along all the official languages, I would say. So and it's linked to language ideologies again, so and public perceptions of language itself. So there's not much data on that, on how these public expectations, how they are enacted in everyday conversations. So it would be very much interesting to do maybe discourse analysis, let's see, in family gatherings, and see how the normativity is enacted maybe in communication practices.
Right. Thank you very much. And I do have yet another question, which is more or less related to this, but what you just said is quite interesting, because we definitely don't think much about the possibility that perhaps, you know, global English is somewhat at odds with these pre-existing ideas. And that's why we have research on compatibility, like what you're doing, like what I'm doing in a side project as well. But here is something which I've been thinking about since reading something that was published by Rose McKinley and Galloway when they were reviewing research in global English, where it had been conducted around the world. And they noticed that most of the research has been conducted in limited regional contexts. Most of the research has come from mainland Europe or Eastern Asia. And one thing they do not mention in the study, but I've been thinking about, well, I was thinking these two contexts, although they are far apart, they do have something in common that most countries in these areas, they have a national language and they tend to be monolingual, the majority of them. And I was wondering, do you think that, and you know, the results of these studies were always found to be resisting the idea of global Englishes, right? They did seem to have negative attitudes towards global Englishes, whether you ask teachers, whether you ask students. Do you think we would find something different if we were to conduct research in other contexts? Like, for example, Kazakhstan has bilingualism, but as your research showed, even there we find negative attitudes for various reasons. A country even more diverse than Kazakhstan, do you think it would lead to more positive attitudes, or it would be the same thing, more or less? This is pure speculation I'm asking for, really.
Yes, thank you, Paolo, saying that this is, about speculation, because I may not have give you an informed answer to that question. But yes, so in my research, as I said, this particular study is part of a larger study. So in that larger study, I was also talking to students, and the resistance from the students is much stronger. They were saying, okay, this is the English teacher. Why this teacher is not speaking like an American? We are, we come here to sound like Americans. We don't want to sound like Russians or Kazakhs, and we don't want this strong accent. And they are expecting the teacher to be a model of that ideal, so to say, pronunciation. So from the larger data set, my student participants, yes, they were mainly talking that they expect a native speaker of English. So even, I had some instances of interviews when the students shared their stories that, they came to some language course and it was advertised as, having a native speaker. And when the parents saw a teacher from Nigeria, that parent canceled the subscription. The parent said, no, we came here, to study with native speakers, and we don't see any native speaker. So in that sense, yes, it seems that there is resistance. And in this particular research that I shared, the teacher participants were reporting some, their experiences of interaction with more senior colleagues who have been brought up with this idea of native speaker based model of teaching, and those senior colleagues, they could not see value of global Englishes. And actually some of the teacher participants, they tried to be pioneers, so they wanted to break that barrier, and they spent quite of their effort to sort of try to raise their awareness. But then some of the teachers were reporting that they become tired of it, so they have a lot of work to get done. They have their teaching and so on, and so advocating for these quite powerful ideas, it was something that they couldn't do for those reasons.
Yes, that sounds a familiar experience for me. Yeah, but yeah, definitely. I guess we will need more research and in even more areas to figure out, unfortunately, the compatibility. There is one more question for you in the chat. Can you see it, Gulnissa?
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if I read it correctly. Dobrochna Futro. Okay. The question is about one of the participants mentioned not fully speaking Kazakh, therefore not being one of them. Could you say more about it? Is this approach related specifically to the Russian language speakers or other languages too? Okay. I had 25 participants, and what they, when they were filling in the demographic details, so I had about 5 different representatives of different ethnic groups. So, and this idea, I think this question also is related to the previous idea of what is an identity in Kazakhstan nowadays. So most of the participants, they believe that being Kazakh means speaking Kazakh. And this also was related to the idea of belonging. Teachers wanted to be on the same page with their students, and they pretty much wanted to establish this rapport with their learners. But some of the teacher participants who were not ethnically Kazakh, from what they were saying, it seems that it was challenging for them. For example, one of my participants, she was ethnically Russian, but she speaks good Kazakh. But then she told me when I start speaking Kazakh and when the people see sort of non-Kazakh appearance, they switch languages. So it's quite actually complex. I think we need more research into that. So this is what I can say only, I mean, based on data that I have looked at.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you for the
Gulnissa.
question.
If there are no further questions, I will say that we will close the seminar here. The study in which you publish this information is Gulnissa 2021 on system.
Yes, this one.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, I will definitely look it up because I think it covers some ground I haven't seen before, which might be helpful for me as well. But yeah, thank you everybody for participating. We will not have another seminar until the end of August, if I'm not mistaken. But please keep looking for the seminars. We will keep updating them, and we will keep sending out emails with the information that you need to come aboard. Apart from that, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you so much, Gulnissa, for the wonderful presentation. And yeah, I hope to see you again in a month or so.
Thank you very much
See
for
you,
your
everyone.
time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gulnissa. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paula.